In Chapter 8, we will focus on everyday memory and memory errors. And you might be wondering, well, what does that mean? And here's what it means. Here are all of the interesting topics that we're going to be covering in this module. As you can see, they include things such as autobiographical memory, memory for exceptional events, the constructive nature of memory, how memory can be modified or created by suggestion, the power of pictures, and then finally eyewitness testimony, which is the topic that we're going to focus on in this lecture. And in the module, you'll notice that our critical thinking discussion is focused on eyewitness testimony, as are the videos. So let's get right down to it and start talking about eyewitness testimony. And of course, we wouldn't be talking about this if eyewitness testimony was completely accurate. What we want to focus on are the errors in eyewitness testimony. Testimony by an eyewitness to a crime about what he or she saw during the crime turns out to be important when trying to make a conviction. And that's because eyewitness testimony is one of the most convincing types of evidence to a jury. A jury, like other people, they assume that people see and remember accurately. And we've covered enough material in this course to question that, to know that sometimes we don't always see what we think we see, and we certainly don't remember it. But like other memory, eyewitness testimony can also be inaccurate. And you'll either see this in the videos for this module, or maybe you've already watched it. So what are the problems with eyewitness testimony? Well, one may be the case of mistaken identity. Your textbook mentions several real-life cases of mistaken identity, including someone named Ronald Cotton. He spent 10 years in prison for a rape that he did not commit. I mention him in particular because he was a guest speaker at Miami University last year. Another problem can be the constructive nature of memory. We often fill in details that we never actually saw. In a study in 1998 by Wells and Bradfield, this was a laboratory study, so this was not a real-life crime. They had participants view a security videotape with a gunman in view for 8 seconds. Right now, 8 seconds is a pretty long time. In this study, all of the participants identified someone as the gunman from the photographs that they were shown afterward. But the actual gunman's picture was not presented, right? Why did they identify the gunman even though the gunman was not present? And that's because of the errors that are associated with perception and attention, right? And we've seen this in prior modules. One of these errors is due to attention and arousal. We know from research that attention can be narrowed by some specific stimuli that's in the environment. In particular, in research on eyewitness testimony, they focus on something called a weapons focus, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's our tendency when we are observing a crime scene to focus more specifically on the weapon than to other details that are in the environment. In a study by Stanley and Johnson in 2000, let me back up. This was a laboratory study, and in this study, they found that firing a weapon was particularly distracting to participants. In particular, their primary dependent variable here was shooting reliability. So I'm sorry, was the percent of details that were recalled. What they found, as you can see in these data, was that across the board, the participants remembered fewer details, and this includes details about the perpetrator, details about the victim, and details about the weapon. Participants recalled fewer details when a shot was fired than when a shot was not fired. And so what this suggests is that shooting details or shooting decreases the amount of details that were recalled. Another error that we can often make in eyewitness testimony is errors due to familiarity. We often mistake the identity of the criminal because the person looks familiar to us. This is known as source monitoring. Sometimes we mistake the source of the familiarity. We may perceive that this person is the criminal because we know them from some other situation rather than from the crime scene. In this very interesting study that Ross did, they had participants view a film in which a male teacher was reading to the students, and they viewed a film in which a female teacher was reading to students. And then all of them viewed a film about the female teacher being robbed, and they were asked to pick the robber from a photo spread. You'll notice that when the actual robber was not in the photo spread, 60% of the participants identified the male teacher as the one being the robber. When the actual robber was in the photo spread, that number goes down to about 18%. Why did they do this, as particularly here? Why did they identify the robber as being the male teacher? Because of familiarity. It turned out that the robber looked much like the male teacher. Some other errors that we can make in eyewitness testimony include errors due to suggestion. For example, suggestive questioning. If you are asked, how fast was the car going when it smashed into the other car? Versus, how fast was the car going when it ran into the other car? It turns out that when we use the word smashed rather than ran, we estimate that the car was going a lot faster, right? This is due to the misinformation effect. We also have a problem when it comes to confirming feedback. If we are given confirming feedback, it actually increases the confidence in our testimony. For example, in this study where participants were asked to view a video of a crime, and then they were asked to pick the perpetrator from a photo spread. When they picked the perpetrator and they were given confirming feedback, look at their confidence versus if they received no feedback or if they received disconfirming feedback. So just by having somebody there say, okay, can be enough to make you think that you are getting confirming feedback, which actually increases our confidence rating. Now you might think, well, who cares how confident we are in our eyewitness testimony as long as we're accurate? Well, that's great, but you know what a jury is looking for when they hear eyewitness testimony? They are looking for how confident that eyewitness is. And if that eyewitness says, well, I'm pretty sure I saw that person do it, that's going to be far less convincing than if the eyewitness says it is beyond a doubt that that person committed this crime. So now we have looked at several different errors in eyewitness testimony. It turns out that we know quite a bit about eyewitness testimony and how accurate it is or it isn't. So what are we doing about this? Are cognitive psychologists just sitting on this pile of evidence? Well, no, it turns out that cognitive psychologists are doing things about it. We'll just talk about a few of these. Many of these have to do with the lineup procedure, which is where a lot of eyewitness testimony can have errors. One thing that we might do is to inform the witness that the perpetrator might not be in the lineup. We might also use fillers in a lineup that are similar to the suspect. We might use sequential presentation rather than simultaneous. By sequential, I mean just have the people in the lineup present themselves one at a time. If we do this rather than simultaneous, it avoids relative judgments. Cognitive psychologists have also suggested ways to improve interviewing techniques. Most specifically, they advocate something called a cognitive interview, which turns out to take a lot more time than a non-cognitive interview. But in a cognitive interview, the idea is to let the witness talk without any interruptions or any distractions. And we've seen why. We've seen that if we just say, okay, that's enough to convince an eyewitness that what he or she just said is accurate. The results of research from doing cognitive interviews suggest that cognitive interviews are more likely to result in more correct rather than incorrect details being recalled. So as you can see, cognitive psychologists are making a difference, and they are making use of what they know about errors in perception and errors in attention that ultimately lead to errors in memory.